All right, it's been a couple of days, so I've got a couple of things to cover, but I wanted to start out with the word arrogance, because one of the gammas on one of the videos said, "Oh, you're a very arrogant man." Now, let me correct you. I'm not arrogant. I'm superb. It's different. So, in my Oxford English Dictionary, arrogant. And, as you get wiser, you will need things for your eyes. It's just one of those things. So, now that I've got this, I can read this properly. Arrogant, insolent, arrogate, making or implying unwarrantable claims to dignity, authority, or knowledge, aggressively conceited or haughty, presumptuous, overbearing, used of manner, action, manner, etc. And then it gives some example, as this does, of various works that have mentioned the word arrogant. Now, you see, this is the important part, where it says making or implying unwarrantable claims to dignity, authority, or knowledge. Now, that's precisely the difference between arrogant and superb, which, in English it doesn't quite translate as that, but arrogant means somebody who says he can or thinks he can when he can't. That's not my case. If I tell you that I can do something, you can bet your ass I can do it. In Italian, we have a word, superbo. Now, superbo is a guy who can do what he says he does, and he's not modest about it. It's different. So you gammas out there, learn to speak properly. Anyway, as per the title of this one, what do the Crusades have to do with Epstein and his evil circle of evil and child molestation and sacrifice to Moloch? Well, as you guys know, I'm reading God's Battalion, which is a really brilliant book. And yes, as I originally thought I remembered from various other books I've read, I was correct. God's Battalion by Rodney Stark is brilliant because it has all the references to a number of historians that have gone through this in detail. Now, the really interesting thing is that in his book, Rodney Stark covers the work of another guy whose name I forget. It's some double-barreled name, maybe like Ridley Smith or something like that. I can't remember. Anyway, what this guy did is he went over a bunch of documents, like literally thousands of documents, and put them all in a computer to try and figure out who the Crusades were and whatever, because there's a huge amount of documentation on the Crusades, on the First Crusade. And a lot of this has to do with deeds of sale and so on, which, as per the times, had also the reasons why land was being sold, castles were being sold, and so on. And just like I'd already read in Harold Lamb's The Crusades of Iron Men and Saints, it's patently clear that the Crusaders didn't do the Crusades to, go and get money or because they had too many second sons that didn't have a job. Absolute nonsense. The Crusade was absolutely done for religious fervor, to free Jerusalem from the infidels and protect the sacred crypt where Jesus was buried and from where he rose after the cavern or the crypt had already been destroyed by the Muslims, but they didn't want any more to happen to it, and to protect the pilgrims that were going to Jerusalem and that were getting attacked by various Muslim raiders and so on. It's absolutely clear that the motive was religious fervor and belief in God and Jesus Christ, because, and I didn't know this, but Pope Alexander II had already called for a crusade in 1063. Now keep in mind, the original crusade, the First Crusade, the setting off date was supposed to be August 1095, but Peter the Hermit and William the Penniless had already set off earlier than that and arrived at Constantinople before the actual real Crusaders. And you have to keep in mind, this is the really interesting part, that the real Crusaders, the knights that were the real sort of force behind the Crusades, there were 5 main groups. 3 of these were led by princes. And that's why they're called the Prince's Crusade. So there's like, you know, Peter the Hermit's Crusade and William the Penniless Crusade. But really, these guys were sort of adjuncts. The real Crusaders, the real knights in armor that like did most of the fighting and so on. These were very well trained military men. And it's really quite important to understand the saying of the time. And Rodney Stark paints a very good picture of this. Because you know, these knights and so on, they were very devout men, but they were also extremely violent. And, you know, to me that's normal because of how I grew up and whatever. But I know that modern sensibilities don't understand this dichotomy, but it's not a dichotomy at all. You see, the knights were raised to be essentially a warrior class, and not unlike the samurai in Japan. But the thing is, being Westerners, the knights had, you know, fiefdoms and castles and so on, and they were a constant war with each other for power, money, whatever. But they were devout Catholics. Now, unfortunately, they were also rather sinful, particularly with respect to killing other people, which, again, as the Catholic Church teaches, killing is always wrong. Right? Regardless of the reason, killing is always bad. And there's a bunch of Protestants right now freaking out, going, but in the Old Testament, no. Shut the fuck up, pay attention if you're a Protestant. You don't get to really speak much because you don't know anything. See, that's where you think I'm arrogant, but I'm just superb. You see, what happened is killing is wrong. Because it is a violent act, it is the taking of a life, it is the cutting down of essentially part of God's beauty, because all life is initially at least potentially positive, good. So killing is always wrong, but we are in a fallen world with fallen men and under the dominion of Satan. So sometimes killing is the best you can do. And when it came to these knights, you know, by the time you come to sort of adulthood, and if you're any kind of man, you probably would have killed a few people. Now, the interesting thing is that at the time of the Crusades, several things were in place. One was there was no usury, so there was no interest. If you made a loan, what used to happen, instead of a loan, is said, oh, well, I'm going to loan X money from you, and I'll leave you my land as sort of collateral until I've paid the loan back. Now, while that land is being left with them, all the proceeds from the land go to the guy who lent you the money. So it is kind of a similar thing, but as soon as the guy comes back and says, here's the money back, he gets his land back. So it was quite different in a way. Now, that was an interesting side point. But the other thing was that if you killed somebody, even if you killed an evil man, okay, so if you're a good knight and you killed off an evil guy, you would still have to do a penance. And these penance from the bishops and the priests, the Catholic bishops and priests, quite often were quite severe. You know, they were quite serious, including all the way up to having to go on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem to have your sins forgotten, sort of thing, forgiven. And so some of these knights had already been to Jerusalem to make penance and back, so they knew what that kind of a trip entailed. Now, the really interesting thing is that because of that other guy whose name I forget, which might have been Riley Smith or something along those lines, double barrel surname, what was absolutely clear is that Pope Urban's II speech, which supposedly launched the crusade, you know, it's not that the Pope went up, did one speech, that's it, crusade starts. It's not quite like that. Urban II obviously canvassed, and he canvassed to the rich families and to the leaders of, you know, various fiefdoms, knights and so on. And these guys, some of them sold their whole land. Some of them sold whole cities that they used to own to finance their going on the crusade, because it was not cheap. It was really expensive. And the Middle East wasn't a rich land. It wasn't a land of milk and honey like the academics keep telling you, that these Crusaders went out there to take money from the poor, harmless Muslims. That's not it at all. And the proof of this is also the fact that Pope Alexander II had already called for a crusade in Spain to push back the Moors. And no one answered that one. Now, Spain was a very wealthy country at the time. It had very rich lands that produced a lot of food and so on. And there was ample reasons, if you were out of funds or if you needed money, there would have been very good reasons to go on a crusade in Spain. And no one went. Now, actually, only about 10% of the elite ruling class of knights actually went on a crusade. And the really interesting part is that the fundamental point of it was this was done by families. There were families of people that led the crusades. I mean, these were like uncles, knights, they were like, the knights were like the uncle, the brother, the nephews, and they were all related. Not only that, but the people who led the crusades were not only like mostly led from families that were the leaders of the pack, but the Crusades was essentially led by Franks and Normans. And the leaders of this Crusades and some of the knights crossed the divide, which was quite unusual. So people that were intermingled from marriage or children or whatever between the Franks and the Normans were all related. Now, what this essentially showed is that a movement like that, and it's a similar thing in the American Revolution, the 3%, only about 3% of people actually revolted and they changed history. The thing that is interesting about the Crusades, it was a group of families and their relatives and people related to each other that essentially led this crusade, and other people followed and so on. And these guys marched, from what is modern day France, Germany, Italy, and so on, all the way through to Jerusalem, and kicked ass. Now, the estimates is that probably about 60,000 people were part of the Crusades proper, because there were hangers-on and thieves, whores, all the stuff that goes with any kind of large movement of people. But of that 60,000, only about 15,000 actually sieged and then conquered Jerusalem. So it's very, think about that. That's a 75% loss of life of the people that actually did it. And because they knew that it was going to be a tough trip, they left wills, they sold their land, they left instructions as to what should happen if they died and what happened to their property if they died, and so on and so forth. Now, what does that have to do with Epstein? Well, a lot, because I'm going to put a link of an article that I archived that my wife sent me, which is basically about this lady called Nicole Junkermann. Nicole Junkermann was apparently born in Germany, but has got a lot of links to Mossad, CIA, all sorts of people, and she's into big tech, and she's now got access to all the NHS database information, including people's names, credit card information, blood groups, disease, anything. All their medical history is there. And there is definite, absolute links between Nicole Junkermann and Ehud Barak, which was, an Israeli very highly placed person that was also involved with Mossad. And if you look at one of her companies, and she's got a host of companies that she's owned, and investment companies, and hedge funds and whatever, and nobody knows who this Nicole Junkermann is. She's kept out of the limelight very much. The guy who wrote the article reckons that it's because there's also been a high level cleansing of her name from the internet. But if you look at some of the people that the directors of the board and so on of some of the various companies, they're all Jewish guys, highly placed Jewish guys with connections in Mossad and so on. And she traveled with Epstein quite a bit. She was involved with Epstein quite a bit. She is one of the very few people who did a trip on her own with Epstein when she was 27 years old. This woman was born in 1975, so she's now about 44 years old. She was also a model, very good looking when she was in her early 20s. Still good looking now from the pictures that I saw, considering she's in her 40s. But, you know, you got to ask yourself, what does, you know, who are these people? How is this all connected? And again, it's families. Because one of the only very few things about the social sciences, and those of you who have been watching my videos know what I would probably think about the social sciences, but there are elements of the social sciences that prove that movements such as the change of religion, or a great social movement such as the Crusades, you know, stuff like that, it happens in families. What happens is it's a network of people. So people get sort of either peer pressured or called into it, or sort of just dragged into it by their family and their close friends. And that's what made the Crusades happen. That is how evil works too, because the mechanism for spreading the social, you know, for spreading whatever the ideology or whatever the philosophy or whatever the thing is through families. Now this is important because that is how evil works, but that's also how good works. So to you immortals out there that are already starting to gather people, that are starting to tell your friends, that are starting to convert back to hardcore Catholicism, or also known as proper Catholicism, that's where it comes from, you know. Influence your friends, influence your family. That's where it comes from. And what is a Catholic? Well, let me give you an example. The Normans and the Franks were, you know, these are people that were essentially Scandinavians, Germans, what modern day Scandinavians, Germans, Teutonic races and so on, sort of from the north of Italy as well, the Alps, that sort of area, which is actually where I'm from as well, probably why I'm 6'2", which is pretty big for an Italian. And believe it or not, although you can't tell from my flowing locks of hair that I have now, but when I was a little kid, you know, my brother, myself, my sister, we all had very blonde hair. So, and my great grandfather was apparently 2 meters tall. So, you know, big people from the Alpine region, or that sort of area of Venice, just above, sort of above Venice, north of Venice, and near Venice, and in Venice. There's a lot of Venetians in my family. So these guys, these Normans, were pretty big people generally, and some of their leaders were huge. You know, these were big guys. They were like giant class. They were like Owen-sized, and you can tell. You know, I've mentioned this in one of my other videos. I can't remember which one. Maybe the one about the where I was gonna have a talk with Owen or something about. But you know, he's a big shouty guy who gets pretty passionate about stuff. You could see Owen being in the ranks of the Normans, just swinging like a berserker when he loses it, you know. Anyway, these big guys were absolutely devout and not afraid to get in a fight. Here's one little thing that happened. 40 of these guys, only 40 of them, landed in Italy, and you know what is present-day Salerno, and found that, you know, because Sicily at that time was invaded by the Moors, just like Spain. So Salerno had been taken, which is a relatively big city even then, had been taken over by the Muslims, by the Moors. And these 40 pilgrims, these 40 Norman pilgrims, saw this and said, well, this won't do. We can't have Muslims take over Salerno. So they got armor and weapons, and 40 of them wiped out the Muslims that were taking over, you know, Salerno, that had sieged and taken over Salerno. They just wiped them out, just killed all of them and routed the survivors. And when they were done, they gave, you know, their armored weapons back, whatever, sold them, and they refused payment, and they just carried on going back home. They refused payment, they refused any accolades for anything, they refused lands, they refused everything. They said, no, we're just doing this because we're Christians. Now, the modern man, the modern person thinks, oh, but they were barbarians, you know, they killed people. Yeah, of course they killed people. They needed to. You know, there's something else. I mentioned it on Owen's live chat an hour or two ago, whatever. Owen is very good at giving really good reasons why not to do violence, especially to the Jews and so on. Which, by the way, another interesting point, there were Germanic, 2 or 3 branches of the Germanic Crusaders on the way from Germany, before they even got to Hungary. They killed Jews. They actually did pogroms and killed a bunch of Jews. In every instance, the Catholic bishops tried to protect the Jews and sometimes lost their life trying to protect the Jews. Hid them in churches, told them to get away because these guys were coming. In every instance, the Catholic bishops tried to protect the Jews because it goes against Catholic dogma. Killing is essentially wrong. But these guys, wiped out, killed, dozens and maybe even hundreds of Jews at some point. When they got to Hungary, by now Hungary was aware what these guys were like. Hungary wiped them out. These guys tried to enter Hungary. Hungary said, no, you're not allowed here. They tried by force, and Hungary wiped all of them out. These guys basically never made it to Constantinople because they got wiped out by actual strong Catholic knights that were following the Catholic rules. So, that puts the lie to the idea that, as Catholics, we know that the Jews are essentially a cursed race because they killed our Lord and Savior, and their blood is upon them. That is in the Bible. It's part of the thing. So our intention, our idea is to convert the Jews, but we also know they're very resistant to that, and we also know that they're very sneaky and try and subvert the countries they live in. I have, as a result of reading Vox's blog, I've just recently purchased Hilaire Belloc's The Jews, and it's I've just had the first couple of pages, and it's already a promising read because the guy was prescient, really. He predicted a whole bunch of stuff that we then saw with the Second World War and so on. So, and Owen is very good at saying do not do violence on others, and defend yourself if you have to, but do not go out and kill the Jews. And I absolutely agree with that. It's very true. One of the guys in the chat, and I said something like, Owen is kind of like one of the good bishops of the Catholic times of the Crusades, because he's basically saying, no, don't do harm, don't kill people, just be a cool guy. I'm more like one of those crusading knights that's like, yeah, we're going to go to Jerusalem. Now, I wouldn't persecute Jews. That's just not I wouldn't persecute anybody. It's not my nature. But if you are now attacking, our sacred places, if you're now attacking our religion, if you're now attacking our people, if you're now attacking my land, if you're now attacking my city, if you're now attacking my family, well then fuck you. It's going to be scorched earth until you go right back to the hole you crawled out of. And when you're in the hole that you crawled out of, I'm going to go into that hole and set fire to it so that you never do it again. And that is how a Catholic should be. Don't start a fight, don't start the violence, but if the violence comes to you, you respond. And always, always, always respond to your enemies, with rhetoric when it's okay, with dialectic when you need that. And if you're going to have violence done to you, then the proper response is to defend yourself, okay? Don't begin the attack, don't instigate the fight, don't start the fight. Although there are exceptions, even in canon law, you are allowed to strike the first blow if it's in defense of yourself or others or innocence or so on, because it's inevitable. In other words, you're surrounded by 10 guys who are going to try and kill you. That's fine. If you land the first blow and take one out first before the other ones all jump, you don't have to wait to be shot before you shoot back. It's quite clear when somebody's trying to do you harm. So, but that's the kind of people that, when I mentioned in the strategy of, what the Catholic people should be like and so on. So, for all of you listening that are this way inclined, build up your little local community. Build it up with your brother, with your cousin, with your friend, with your mates. Talk to them about it. Read The Crusades. Read The Crusades by Harold Lamb, okay? You can get it on Kindle. And read God's Battalion. If you're only going to read 2 books in your life, read those 2. Now, if you're a guy that just wants the fact and whatever, read God's Battalions, because that's got a wealth of very well researched information in a very simple, easy, digestible manner. If you want a little bit more oomph into it, read The Crusades by Harold Lamb too. And if I was going to read both, I would probably read God's Battalion first, because that gives you a nice picture of everything. While Harold Lamb, wrote it in the 30s, 40s, and 1930, I think, And at that time, people still knew the classics. People still knew who Tancredi was. People still knew who Godfrey was and his family. Nobody knows that now. So it would be good for you to read God's Battalions, because it gives you an overview with all the facts. And it's not boring at all. It's very well written. And Harold, then when you read the Crusades of Iron Men and Saints, you've got sort of a little bit of the background to really get into the details of what these individuals did, which is really cool. So read those two books and then tell me that you don't, want to be Catholic. Catholicism is Christianity. I'm also digesting a lot of information for the documentary I'm busy trying to put together, which hopefully with the new technology that I got, if I can make it all work. This is still the old microphone, but I'm supposedly getting a new microphone bits tomorrow. So we'll see how that works. Hopefully, I've done a little bit of stupid little noises like this just to see if the mic picks it up. I know it can be a bit disturbing, but I'm not a techie guy. I hate having to learn all this stuff. I'm basically an old man, or Clint Eastwood in Gran Torino. If I could do this by just having a rifle and shooting somebody, off my lawn, that would be how I'd do it. Unfortunately, I have to have the phone and the microphone and blah blah blah. Anyway, who says old dogs can't learn new tricks? And also because I'm not old, just wiser. So that's how Epstein and the Crusades are connected, because evil works in the same way. And I've done quite a bit of reading about the Freemasons and how they've destroyed the various royal families throughout Europe. And I guarantee you, once again, it's in families. The stuff is in families. Nicole Junkermann is not just some random German chick that got born in Germany and then got recruited by Mossad. No, she was involved. These people run in families, military families, families of spies breed spies. And yeah, now and then one can come in from the cold, from the outside, but generally speaking, these are lineages. Nothing much has changed since the time of kings and barons and knights. The only thing that's changed is that it's all hidden now. But the elites, the billionaires, you think that they're not passing that stuff down to their sons and their sons' sons and so on? Of course they are. Of course they are. And as a Catholic, that's what you need to do. The same. Again, I've had a couple more, 2-3 more people telling me I'm going to convert, and it's changing now. Before it was like, I'm going to become a Christian, then I'm going to become an Orthodox. Now it's, I'm going to become a Catholic pre-Vatican II. So there's also some comments of some guys that have left comments on that note. So that book, I believe, my little book, it's apparently keeps having an effect. I'm quite both pleasantly surprised and happy about it. So if you haven't read it yet, maybe read it. If you have read it, and you're gonna, especially if you've read it and now you're gonna convert and you're gonna become Catholic, definitely leave me a review and say so, and let me know, because I'm keeping count. If you don't want to give your details or whatever, that's fine. Just pop me an email and let me know, yep, I've converted, whatever. I'm actually just keeping a number, and I'm going to compare it to the number of books sold. I haven't looked at how many of, the last time I checked, there was 21 books sold and 5 people converted. So I've got a couple more now, but I don't know how many books have been sold. And it's just interesting for me to keep a statistic on it, because if that 25% conversion rate keeps going, then, there's obviously, I managed to do something right. Then again, keep in mind, I've written that book 3 times, because I started to write that book and I pretty much finished it, and then I wasn't happy with it, and then I rewrote it, and then I rewrote it. And every time I tried to make it smaller and smaller and smaller. And in the end, I think I've come close to something that I'm relatively happy with. I would add God's Battalion by Rodney Stark in the bibliography if I'd written it now. And if I ever do a little update on it, I'm going to try and keep it the same sort of length, but maybe I'll sneak that one in. Okay, that's it. It's only a half hour, so I hope you're not too disappointed. And again, if you guys have topics that you want me to cover a bit, I know some people have made some suggestions. I'm not ignoring them. It's just, I do what I kind of want to do when I feel like it, sort of thing. Quite a few ladies on the chat, which are, most of the people watching my videos are men, but there's a few women and more than a couple of them have expressed the wish for Kurgan t-shirts. And I've already been in touch with the guys from Crypto Fashion who said they're gonna do it. I forget now what it is that I suggested to them to do. I think it's something like I'm Catholic, not Novus Orco, something like that. And I think maybe at the back, immortals or something along those lines. So if you've got any specific ideas, just drop a comment or drop me an email, and we'll see. All the proceeds, I know the Crypto Fashion guys, they're good guys. They've had some hard stuff going, so I won't be collecting any money from any t-shirts that are sold. I'm leaving that completely to the Crypto Fashion guys because I don't want to say anything personal about it, but I know that they've been going through a tough time with some private sort of health issues and so on. So if I can help them a little bit, that'd be great. If you guys can help them a little bit, that'd be great. And check them out. Anyway, Crypto Fashion has got some very cool t-shirts. I've got a few of them which Fox gave me, and I think I bought one. I can't remember. I've got a few lying around, but they've got some really funny messages, some cool messages. So that was it. That's my little pitch for them, and that's it. Have a good night.